Hey folks, welcome to Idio Talk, a Radiohead podcast. I'm Walker, one of your two hosts. I'm very excited for you to hear this week's episode. Zach and I sat down and discussed what's a hugely significant and important chapter in the band's canon. That is their 2000 album, Kid A. Now, as a lot of you may know, this is a very rich point in the band's history, and we wanted to really give it its due. So we went well over 2 hours. We decided to break that up into 2 episodes. So this week, you're getting part 1 of our conversation about Kid A, and next week, you'll get part 2. So make sure you're subscribed if you're not already so that you get that next part of the conversation. If you're a fan of the band or a fan of the podcast, I think you're really going to enjoy it. All right, that's it. And without further ado, enjoy the show. Listeners, welcome to Idio Talk, a Radiohead podcast. I am one of your two hosts, Walker Glenn.
I'm Zach Glenn.
We are, I think I could speak for both of us, so very excited to be back with you. You now, I don't know if we gained or lost listeners from our last episode, but you might be logging on being like, my God, do I hope they talk about Radiohead this time? These motherfuckers talked about 1989's Batman.
Oh, well, yeah. Okay.
Right. That's so, I don't know. Do you think who do you think is more popular, Radiohead or Batman? Now, I know famously John Lennon said the Beatles were bigger than Jesus. Did Tom York ever say, Radiohead's bigger than,
than Batman?
We're bigger than Batman, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would say Batman. He's just more well-known.
I think exactly. I definitely think
I was
it's
like earnestly thinking about it.
I mean, I think it's like Radiohead.
Who do you think's more hated? I mean, famously, these Batman
do you
movies
mean
are just...
in the Batman universe? Definitely Batman. In our universe, I would say Radiohead is probably more hated than Batman.
Really? I don't know. I think...
Do you know anyone who's like... I mean, I feel like
Batman
people
movies
are either into Batman or disinterested.
No, not like they hate Batman the character. I was more thinking about the movies, especially with that most recent movie, that it was very divided.
Was it pretty polarizing?
Yeah, I think so.
I liked it.
Yeah.
We talked about this last time.
Okay.
We both liked it.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. I mean, Superman really hates Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he hates Radiohead?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
you think so?
He's a throwing some Coldplay for Lois.
Absolutely. Now, ironically, I think Batman
would
probably
Radiohead.
really likes Radiohead, especially this new
the
emo
one,
Batman.
Yeah, definitely.
If he's listening to something in the way,
yeah,
that the next Batman movie with Robert Pattinson should have diegetic listening of How to Disappear Completely.
Which I think would be perfect for the tone those movies are going for.
Yeah.
How to make Alfred disappear completely.
Oh.
Yeah, it didn't quite happen in this one.
Point being, we talked about Batman last time. This time, we're going to do things a little different by doing them the same, by talking about Radiohead. Don't worry, listeners. If you have been with us this far and you were angered by our departure from Radiohead into the Batman universe, we're back. We're back and we're better than ever, I would say, because today we have a extremely seminal work in the Radiohead discography to discover. Now, I did not realize until recently that the root word of seminal is semen. And I'm not crazy about that I think of that every time I say seminal now. Probably it's one of those words that, has the definition has changed over time because of how but I think of that as just meaning an important, impactful, and influential work.
It's a tough word to think of a synonym for off the top of your head because seminal is. Oh, I like too that you said it's one of their seminal works, which
yes,
I wouldn't correct that because I think they do have at least 2.
Yes,
right.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, if we're thinking of this an OK Computer.
Yeah, I think by like if I'm a journalist for Rolling Stone, not like a Radiohead obsessed fan, in which every album and you starting at OK Computer is seminal. Well, that's not true. You know what I'm saying? I would think culturally, though, there are at least 2 seminal works. And
Totally.
This
in the
OK
Radiohead discography, when I say seminal, I mean one that
is covered in semen.
Yes, exactly. One that, and by the way, that's how much I love Radiohead, that all my albums are covered in semen.
It's like a Playboy mag.
Yeah, exactly. The liner notes are all stuck together. And also, I have to assume Radiohead is a band of 5 lads.
Mm-hmm.
Should we cover this again?
Yeah. I mean, we really departed to 1 lad on our last episode, so let's go back to the 5 and just redefine.
Right. This is not one man from Gotham.
Mm-mm.
This is 5 men from Oxfordshire, England. And they formed a band that was originally called On a Friday.
In 1987.
In 1987, I was 1 year old. Zach wasn't born yet, but he could feel it.
I was a seminal twinkle in my...
Yeah, exactly. Zach was literally seminal at that time in our father's balls. Hello, Dad. Anyway. And so 20 years later, 23 years later, OK Computer, or 23 years later, Kid A comes out. Wait, 13 years
13
later.
years later, yeah.
My bad. Oh,
that's okay.
God. This is...
it's not going well.
We have to start over.
So 87 on a Friday, and then fast forward to the year 2000, and you have Kid A.
We have Kid A changing the landscape of rock and roll, electronic music, post-rock, Brit rock.
Well, and back to kind of coverage of the band, what's interesting, as we talked about in our first episode, and I'm sure we'll talk about again, the lineup hasn't changed. So, On a Friday was composed of the same 5 members.
Yes.
Tom York, lead singer, guitar player, pianist.
Yep.
Johnny Greenwood, lead guitarist.
Multi-instrumentalist.
Colin Greenwood,
bass
player.
The foundation, almost, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the backbone of the rhythm section there.
And
don't forget about the guy on the Skins.
Yep, Phil Selway.
Yeah.
Drummer.
And that sounds like a pretty full lineup right there. It's probably all you need to have a good band.
No, you got to have somebody who's going to man that shaker and 2 other things. And
somebody to twiddle the knobs on the reverb pedal.
Our old friend, Ed.
Ed, the handsome man.
Yeah.
The tall man, the slender man. Have we called him the slender man yet?
No. I think that's a good call, though.
I meant to the other day. Zach drew a really cool picture of Johnny Greenwood, and he sent me an updated version of it and was like, check out this picture I drew of Johnny Greenwood. And I wish I'd done this. I was going to say, check out this picture I drew of Ed O'Brien and just send you a picture of the Slender Man. So just imagine that joke that I thought of in my head and enjoy that. I didn't do it, but I feel like it got its payoff now.
Speaking of jokes that we didn't execute, I wanted to start this episode off desperately with "Who's in a bunker? Who's in a bunker?" All right.
Yeah. It's like our kind of like
hey everyone, it's Zach and Walker. Who's in a bunker?
Good morning, Vietnam. Who's in a bunker?
Yeah. Because that is a lyric off of one of the seminal tracks from the album Kid A, which we're talking about today.
And it's important to know that also not only are our copies of these albums covered in semen, but they are also seminal because this is what I was getting to when I said that there's 5 men. Look, in Radiohead, men are going to be men. Can we say that here?
Yeah.
And there's so few places where men can be men these days, and Radiohead is not one of them. In Radiohead, it's a bit of a boys' club.
Bit of it, yeah. I mean, even Nigel, the unofficial 6th member.
There's not a woman in sight in Radiohead,
no.
and I mean, we know that Tom York on the beds claims he's talking to his girlfriend, but I have seen neither hide nor hair of her.
Yeah, he's still waiting for something to happen.
Yeah. But that to say, 5 men in a band, things get a little lonely out there on the road. I have to assume.
Where's this going?
I have to assume that all of these men during the recording of this album were just backed up to the eyeballs with semen.
Yeah.
And that is also what makes this a seminal work, is I think they all released the day this album, they made like a Seinfeld-esque bet where they're like, none of us are gonna have a wank. No sex, no wanking, ain't it? This was Tom, by the way, who made this rule. Until the album's done, until it comes out, and then only if it gets rave reviews, mate. Unfortunately, this album was very, very well received, though also, like the current Batman, divisive in its own right, as we will get into, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, we'll get into that. I have my notes here, and I have it I have them organized chronologically of like what the climate was, and then we don't have to follow this at all, but I do think talking about critical reception after whenever it is we talk about it, one of the things that's interesting is it was initially divisive, and then I think very quickly the critical community scrambled to make sure that they were on the right side of history, because this album has only risen in, like, when Rolling Stone does top 100 albums since 2000, it rises every year in their ranking,
right,
closer to number one, and that was sort of an immediate effect. In that, in this book I have here that we're going to reference a couple times by Stephen Hayden, it's called This Isn't Happening. There was Pitchfork and Melody Maker, which is not a magazine I was familiar with, but apparently they were a big deal in the early aughts. Melody Maker was really down on it and then quickly changed their tune. Same with Pitchfork. No, Pitchfork was one of the ones that was initially very positive. But he's just kind of poking fun at the fact that I think music critics immediately, wanted to appear to have some depth. And I think that a lot of people maybe may have that reaction, because it is, I think Kid A is hard to know how you feel about it upon a first listen if you can reach that far back. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about the critical reception. There's a lot of, not hypocrisy, but just you can kind of feel when you read some of the reviews, it's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, there's a lot of retconning in and I think this is a funny thing that happens in the community of criticism in general, because I feel like Roger Ebert would do this a lot too. And to his credit, I think he would stick to his guns a lot, and he had a lot of weird takes about movies that are generally very well regarded.
He liked The Shining, though.
There you go. I mean, but maybe before I brought this up, I should have had a single example, but I know that film critics do this too, where it's like they'll shit all over a movie and then it like gains respect with it and finds an audience as time goes on, and then they kind of come back and go, yeah, it's actually pretty good, which is fine. We're all allowed to change our minds, but I swear I may have brought this up on this podcast before, but if we talked about this thing Pitchfork was doing last year, where they were
let's talk about it again. I have a dim
They
memory.
were doing a thing, and I read Pitchfork regularly. I learn about a lot of music that I wouldn't otherwise know about from Pitchfork. I think it's a great. I'm sure that now Pitchfork might be a little bit like of the old man place to go, but for me, it's a great one-stop shop when I am looking for new music.
Good place for a man to be a man.
Exactly. As is this podcast. So Pitchfork was doing this thing like in the last year where they were reposting old album reviews and updating the score. And it was album scores we would change if we could. And it was so annoying because it would be like, The Strokes' Is This It? We gave it a 7.9. But in all honesty, it's really more of an 8.3. And it's like, what? Like, it's like...
Gave it a C+. It's a B-.
Yeah, it was so weird. They would just like marginally change all these. Like, none of them were like recanting of like, we said this album sucks and it's great, or we said this album's great and it's bad. It was all just like these marginal numerical differences. And I really, really resented the framing of, we would change these if we could. It's like, you can't.
Right.
It's not the fucking like Book of Revelation or whatever, where it's not like AA literature where you have to like hold a conference if you want to like change the pronouns in the preamble.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
But yeah,
it's also funny too because it sounds like it was written as Pitchfork the brand when it's like, well, why doesn't the journalist who wrote those just like speak up? Because they were written by individual people. I'm sure different people wrote those reviews that they wish they could change.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of people. I think it might have had to do too with, this thing. There's like your accountability for what you said online lives a lot longer than people maybe were counting on 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think some of it too was kind of to rehabilitate things that might have been sexist at the time or things like that. I remember one review in particular was of the Liz Phair album Exile in Guyville, I think. And the new review was updating the score, and it was like, like when I wrote my admittedly cringy review back in 2007 or whatever. That's fine too. Again, right. I want people to like, if you're going to continue to be a public facing person, I don't think it's bad to like address things you said in the past, but just this whole, man, would that it were that we could change this 6.8 to a 7.1. It's just like, yeah, who knows what could have been different.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Well, Zach, before we get into Kid A, do you want to talk about a little bit of it on this podcast? But something that has come up a lot on this show is, will Radiohead make new music or not? And would you believe me if I told you that the handsome man himself, the slender man, Mr. Ed O'Brien, the seminal fellow himself, has recently commented on this very open question that the Radiohead community is buzzing about. Did you know this, Zach?
No, but historically he's the one to do that. But I'm not familiar with this news. Lay it on me.
So I spent some time today on the Radiohead subreddit, which is very fun.
I like. I gotta say,
it's a very nice corner of the internet.
Yeah,
pretty respectful, but also it's just really fun to see how many you and me's there are out there of people getting all like their panties up in a bunch about like really silly, trivial things about Radiohead and getting mad at each other about them. But okay, do you want to hear the somebody wrote a really good kind of summation of what he said in the interview that contains their commentary, but there's also a quote here. Would you rather hear the Ed O'Brien quote or the kind of summation?
The summation.
Okay, so PSA. So I love that. Right off the bat, it's like this is a public service announcement.
And it is.
And it is. And now we're kicking it over to you, folks. PSA. Let's see who this is by. This is by user Jay Zahak. Is this you?
No.
All right.
I promise.
So, PSA, Radiohead has not, quote, broken up, end quote, contrary to the recent articles implying they may have. All right. So it says, Ed O'Brien did an interview a few months ago where he stated that Radiohead may or may not reunite and that people/fans need to be okay if the band can't figure out a way to come back together.
Okay.
Now, this is Walker talking. Right off the bat, that sounds bad to me. That sounds like
I'm warming you up for reality.
Yes, but there's more.
And who better to do that than the handsome man?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you know what? They don't want to hear this news from Johnny's weird face. They're gonna need. It's like how it's like how like things were just as bad, but they felt better when Obama was in office. Exactly. It's just like I'd rather look at this guy tell me that the war's never gonna end.
Yeah. I agree.
I'm way more mad when Trump keeps Guantanamo open than when Obama does it, even though it's the same shit, right?
Yeah.
But Zach, would you know, he follows up that statement immediately by saying the band. Yeah, exactly. He knows what he's doing. He knows he's the handsome man.
He's fucking with their heads.
He's fine and he knows it. He follows it up by saying the band will almost certainly play together again. He just doesn't know when and doesn't want people to be disappointed by the wait.
Okay.
Pretty good, right?
But is that WEIGHT? Or
no, that is
WAI?
WAIT.
Oh, okay. All right,
Yes,
cool,
exactly.
cool. He's like, don't be disappointed by the weight we've all put on. We are no longer.
Pandemic was hard on all of us, yeah? And then this person is kind of editorializing a bit. Oh, this is funny, though. For some reason, most likely the post made earlier discussing this a few days ago, every news publication has made it their goal to fearmonger the reality that Radiohead have broken up silently or something. I just like that this person...
fearmonger the reality.
Right, that's true. I guess it's not great wording on Jay's.
Yeah, you don't go to
part.
Reddit for the best wording, but no, I find that interesting. I mean, to me, that sounds more in the gravitating towards them not reuniting.
But Zach, right here, it says that he says they almost certainly will play together again. Almost certainly.
Yeah, I mean.
There's a too long didn't read summation at the bottom of this, which says, this person is so snotty. It says, speculation is fine, but Radiohead have not made any kind of official statement saying they've broken up. They likely will tour/record again, according to their band members. Very little has changed compared to where the band was post A Moon-Shaped Pool. And honestly, it's been this way for years between literally every album since they began working on solo projects. I gotta call bullshit on that. There has not been a 6-year gap between any albums.
No, I think that, and I think when we get to A Moon-Shaped Pool, we can, speculate. And who knows when that'll be? Maybe there'll be new music on the horizon, because one thing Radiohead are famous for is not, announcing a year in advance that they're working on new material and so forth. But 6 years is a very long time with other projects happening. So we'll just have to see.
Oh, whoa. There's a top comment here that I do not care for. This is a clown right here, Zach. This guy says, I'm using this time to get into their Pablo Honey era stuff and having a blast. Being a fan of theirs for 20 years, I grew bored with the air of pretentiousness surrounding their discography and really wanted to engage with their weaker material in good faith. I'm enjoying Pablo Honey for the unprofessional bundle of youthful excitement that it is, and not being worried about what the critics or fans thinking of it.
Wow.
Which is, I'm fine with all of that, except for that you grew bored with the air of pretentiousness.
Right.
I've grown bored with you, Calm Giant.
Yeah, and it's like, that's fine to go back and be like, I need something simple or whatever, but to just be like, I'm willingly sliding into more simplistic music because I'm getting dumber in my old age and bragging about it.
Yeah.
Stupid.
So that's the recent Radiohead news is that they haven't broken up and they might or they might not. What do you think?
I mean, I'm pretty unfazed by that. I think Ed is kind of famous for keeping the lifeline of communication from Radiohead to the public alive. Now's as good a time as any to say, in my extensive studying and research of the band around this time and then the release of the album, I found out that Ed kept an online diary for fans between OK Computer and Kid A, and it pretty much dropped off. I think Kid A came out October 2nd, 2000, and I think he stopped right as they started touring the album, so in spring of 2000. So, I mean, Ed is definitely, we were playing a cheeky game, but Ed, I think, as we talked about in our second episode around OK Computer and then the B-sides, that he was sort of the person to talk to the press. I don't really think you're going to get too much out of Tom and Johnny's camp, period, but they're also working on touring the Smile right now. So I think, if anything, though, that's also Ed just saying, well, we'll play again, but I don't know when, I don't know how. Very ambiguous.
Do you want to hear the Ed quote?
Yeah.
Okay. Ed says, it might happen, but the other thing is, it might not. And does that matter? It might be 3 people, it might be 4 people, it might be 2 people. There's a truth to what we do. So we're not going to be one of those bands that gets together for the big payday. That ain't gonna happen. The truth is, the fire that's fueled our thing, if we abandon that thing, then the spirit leaves Radiohead.
I think he's really warming the public up for a breakup.
You think so?
That they're done. Yeah, I think that's, to me, what it sounds like.
Well, there's more, Zach.
Oh, okay, sorry.
You're jumping to conclusions.
Okay, I didn't know that was end quote.
There have been lots of artists and lots of bands who have been amazing, but they've lost their potency. See, he's talking about they're running out of that seminal fluid that they've used. They've lost their potency because they're doing it because they don't have anything else to do, or they're doing it for the money. You look at Underworld, they didn't do it for years, but obviously Rick and Carl got back together. Actually, I really want to do this. The thing with Radiohead is we could do something in a couple years. We might not. But I think what it has to be 5 people going, I really want to do this again with you. And I think at the moment, because we've done it for so long, we're all reaching out and having different experiences. And that should be allowed. And that should be encouraged. It definitely sounds, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's definitely saying like, we might do something, but don't hold your breath.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe they just needed to give some kind of broader comment, because I'm sure the other members of Radiohead are also being pestered with like, how do you feel about the Smile? Is this the end of it? So maybe that was meant to sort of just satisfy all the inquiries.
Yeah.
Because, the press are notorious for giving up on stuff. So
Right. Right. I wonder if there's been any headlines of like that are like this quote with Ed, and it's like, not smiling Ed. It's like, nothing to smile about. Ed wonders if there's any future for Radiohead. He's giving like this super balanced and kind of vague quote.
Oh man.
I mean, it's just really hard to sow discord with these guys. They know how to do this.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Let's see here. So we have to go from that back 22 years, Walker.
I've got one more silly thing from Reddit.
Okay.
If you
Not
want to
yet.
talk, is that
22
okay?
seconds ago. Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah, of course.
I just thought this was like a fun game we could play real quick.
Oh, let's do it.
That I also found on Radiohead Reddit, and I don't know if game might be a strong word, but I just thought this was a fun question. You've got 5 minutes before you die. Which Radiohead song would you pick to go out with? And I just want to say to the person who posted this, user clicks squared, you are my kind of dude right there. I hope you're listening to the podcast. I hope we get you, because I love that this person is like
5 minutes.
Yes, but
okay.
I love that they are dying, and one of their highest priorities is finding the right Radiohead song to go out to. And I was curious if you had thoughts on that. Which Radiohead song would you like to pass away to?
I will.
Wow.
Because that song clocks under 2, or is I think 2:13. It's just over 2 minutes. My favorite Radiohead song is Over 5.
Which is what?
Well, we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
So I'm going to keep that. I mean, I can say, but
We haven't talked about that
The
song
album.
in other... Okay, gotcha. We'll save it.
We'll save that one. But
I think I know what it is.
yeah, I Will is also off of an album we haven't discussed. But since, I know the time-wise. Oh, but then I have 3 minutes to kick around.
Yeah.
Oh. Oh, gosh. Man, I was so secure in my choice.
I
until
know,
thought
it's
about
hard
it.
to time. I think I want the song to be going as I pass away.
Okay, well then I'm gonna change my answer and release. No, I'm sticking with I Will. I said it. I said what I said, and I meant what I said.
And what happens when you're dying? Your brain like releases DMT, and so you start having like an insane hallucinogenic trip, and you're maybe seeing God or the devil or what.
Yeah, I mean, it's hit and miss though. I feel like some people don't go out, totally dignified.
That's true. It's like it should ask, which Radiohead song do you want to shit your pants to? Because that's what happens when you die. And I think if I'm gonna be shitting my pants while I die, shitting and pissing my pants, I think I want to go out to Anyone Can Play Guitar,
Big time.
And then I'm getting hit with that. I wanna be Jim Morrison.
I wanna be dead.
Maybe it's like you want to hear a bad Radiohead song so that you're like, you know what, I'm ready to leave. Because if I'm passing away and, I hear those opening chords to Karma Police, part of me is like, maybe this is a beautiful way to die. Another part of me is like, oh, please, I want I want to live so much more. I want to hear more music. I want to make love again.
Maybe, but I mean, the way I kind of think about, so the song I was initially going to pick was "There There." I'm just going to say,
Okay.
which is my favorite Radiohead song at this moment.
Do you
Subject
think
to
it's
change.
a little rockin' to die to?
Kind of, but I love the way that it does build the crescendo, but then it doesn't totally end. It goes out on that on the multi-track drums, which I think even Karma Police in a way might be a nice sort of what is the word? Not montage, but
Soundtrack?
yeah, sure.
Score?
Soundtrack to what I imagine my final neurons firing would maybe feel like.
Uh-huh.
We talked about when we were talking about OK Computer how the feeling it gave me, and I think you a little bit too, is imagining what it might be like to sort of be losing your mind, put into musical form. And I think some Radiohead song overture, that was the word I was looking for. Some Radiohead songs do feel like a bit of an overture towards, to life. I mean that maybe it's person to person, but I've definitely gotten that feeling before.
Yeah. Life is a lot like a Radiohead.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to know what the most upvoted answer is?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, do you want to guess? It's
do.
not one that has been mentioned.
Okay.
By either of us. And I think it's a really good answer. It's not one that I would have thought of, but I think it's a very good answer.
Give me the album.
Okay.
Just give me the album.
Amnesiac.
Pyramid Song.
You got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's like, I like that song. I think I like that song more than you do.
No, I like that song. Yeah.
For sure. Okay. I thought maybe it was one you're kind of cool on. But in any case, I'm not going to say it's in my top 10 Radiohead songs, but it definitely, that song sounds like a good acid trip feels.
Totally.
And I could see that being a very good song to pass away to. Second most upvoted answer is Tree Fingers, which we'll get to. We're going to talk more about Tree Fingers today. That's probably a good in into what we're here to discuss, isn't it? I'm gonna turn this camera off.
Okay. Oh, I didn't realize it was on.
Yeah, so Tree Fingers, we just mentioned, that is a song on this album. We'll get to it, folks. Slow down. I can hear the fans now. Just, when are they going to discuss Tree Fingers? But, not everybody...
Have you looked at the subreddit on Tree Fingers?
I have it
pulled
It's popping. I actually have it pulled up. I thought we'd talk about it. You were joking, like, as if there would be such a thing. Zach, of course there is such a thing. But those of you who are dying to know what our hot takes on Tree Fingers is going to be, not everybody who listens to this podcast. Some of our fans are getting into Radiohead through us. We're guiding them, so they don't. When we say Tree Fingers, they don't even know.
If that happens one time, this will be a win. It's already been a win, this podcast, because I've had so much fun. But just if I find out. Which is totally likely.
If we remain its two sole listeners, it's been worthwhile.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But frankly, I do have bigger aspirations.
I do
for
too.
The podcast.
Yeah. I didn't want to hurt your feelings.
So let's talk about Kid A. We have gone about this in a somewhat atypical way, and the reason we've done it atypically is because atypical starts with the vowel A, which is in the name of the album Kid A. So we're just being thematically here. Normally what we do is I do a teeny tiny bit of research and Zach does a ton. This time we've gone even further in that direction and I have done almost no research and Zach has done a ton. So Zach, would you like to kind of discuss your background with Kid A or get into the history of the album itself? Whatever. My background with this album is a little short. I don't know how yours is, but maybe you could talk about your personal Kid A experience.
My personal background with Kid A is it was the second album of Radiohead that I checked out from the library, and it was interesting because Kid A sort of represented to me what I thought Radiohead was. So we talked about in our first episode, you showed me In Rainbows. I downloaded a few songs, was blown away, but was reticent, if you will, to go like plunge in myself. I don't know why, but it just was. Kid A so Kid A represented like a lot of what I thought the band was, this sort of electronica sound, a little bit slower, more ambient. And listening to it as much as I have for the last, week and a half or so, was a really great experience to, I don't know how to quite say it, but to just really find new things. And I've of course listened to it, in the subsequent years since I checked it out, listened to it on repeat. But it's sort of like the caretaker. It's always been there, right? It is very much a fixture of Radiohead that I don't go back to start to finish super often.
Okay.
And so doing that, and listening to the interstitial tracks and in their entirety was a really good experience. And I definitely would say all Radiohead albums I love, and in truth, I would say OK Computer through In Rainbows I adore and are like in my top 10 in any particular order on any day. But I definitely rekindled some love for this album that I didn't even know was there, honestly. It's my ranking is getting shuffled as we do this podcast. So yeah, I would say that's sort of a brief window of my own personal history. What about you?
Thank you. Man, I was really excited for when it was my turn to talk. Was
it that bad?
No, I'm just kidding. No, I think that like my history with this album has kind of been covered just by us discussing my general history with Radiohead, which is In Rainbows was the one that got me back in. Always kind of had OK Computer as an album that I was aware of, that I knew was a great album that I would listen to from time to time throughout the years, but maintained kind of a very ignorant incuriosity about Radiohead. And when you said it's what you thought Radiohead was, I think I like kind of internalized a narrative that I didn't investigate for myself, that their career from Kid A on was this kind of inaccessible and experimental music that I wasn't interested in. I was only clowning myself, Zach, because I'll say right now, I'm a huge fan of this album, but I really don't think that I got into it properly, if at all. I think maybe I heard one or two things, and if it didn't immediately grab me enough for me to get into it, it was after In Rainbows came out, and I was a full convert to like, this is the band that I got to know everything they ever did. So it's kind of, honestly, in terms of its chronology for me, it's like OK Computer was Radiohead's first album. In Rainbows was their second album that sold me on everything. And then I think the next thing I got into was Kid A. And we'll talk about it. I definitely think you can see how they would evolve from the Bends to OK Computer to this. But I think that Kid A does share more connective tissue within Rainbows than it does with OK Computer.
Okay,
in terms
sonically. Yeah, I could see that.
Just because we'll talk about it when we get to it, but by the time you get to In Rainbows, it's a band who has kind of swam in all these different waters and has all of that vocabulary available to them. But it's a huge departure from the last album we talked about, and an even bigger departure from the 1989 Batman movie that we talked about last time. It's nothing like it.
No.
So that's mine. Is after I got into In Rainbows, Kid A, and its follow-up, Amnesiac, were kind of the next things that I had to really, really grapple with.
As we're talking about it too, because I called the library where I initially checked out all these albums to see if I could find out in what order I checked them out in, because I have my memory versus what actually, and they were like, well, I'm sorry, we don't have that. But
we don't care about your little radio.
I mean, I still have a library card there. They should, but anyways.
That'd be amazing. You go in and some old like clerk at the library like pulls out a box of files and it's just like Zach Glenn Radiohead. We almost digitized these and threw them out, but we thought you'd come back.
So I think my relationship to Kid A is much like it's much like, standing back and my relationship to Radiohead albums is like trying to understand like why have I picked the people that I've the partners I've dated or something like that. Like, is it, was it right place, right time? Is it because we just happen to be in the same town? Is it, that weird Freudian thing about our, what we look for in a partner or something like that? Because I think that the Radiohead albums that are my favorites and that speak to me the most probably have a lot to do with the expectations I had around them prior to listening to them. So, and I think that it kind of explains too my reticence to maybe dive into their full discography because of what you said, where you're like, I had this impression that everything Kid A and onward was maybe not so good, but because you knew when Rainbows came out and that, you're like, I'm going to check this out.
Yeah.
I think I had heard some of In Rainbows, like I said, that was what piqued my interest. And I had downloaded, Paranoid Android, a little bit of the Bends. But I was under the impression that like, Kid A turned them into an electronica band or something like that.
Yeah, same.
And, even on the way up here, as I was listening to the album, and when I was talking about earlier, I was mentioning, ambient textures, whatever. What I forget is that this album has some rockin' songs on it, like rockin', and maybe not rock and roll, and maybe not like they are in OK Computer, and they are more sparse for sure. But yeah, I think that sort of has shaped my relationship to Radiohead albums, or the ones that I had preconceived notions on are the ones that maybe are still not like at the tippy top versus the ones that I had no preconceived notions on still to this day rank very highly for me.
Well said. Well said. Should we get into the history of the album itself?
Yeah.
Should we play some of the songs while we talk about it, do you think? Or do you think we should?
I think we should talk history first.
Let's do it.
Yeah. The front half of this album is not something I can really
I know.
talk
I think
over.
once we're playing it, listeners, we're going to just have to sit our white asses down and listen.
Yeah, Tree Fingers will be completely silent for it. So, yeah, like I said, it came out October 2nd, 2000. So pre 9/11, that's going to come into play.
Yep.
And
Pre 9/11, but in a way they seem to know, didn't they, Zach?
So just the first thing I want to talk about is that Tom York had two nervous breakdowns between during the tour of OK Computer, which went into 1998, and then in 1999. And this is not something that he has maybe given explicit details about, but the book I mentioned before, this isn't happening. The breakdown is described where he was in New York. He went on the subway to try and escape his own show. And, even though he's a short bloke, he does stick out like a sore thumb and people knew who he was. So he ended up getting like kind of forced back to perform his show. And then the second breakdown, I think, is more of a prolonged
What an intense story.
Yeah. He like slipped into a deep depression. And, they did take time to like get sorted out on their own before they entered the studio. And he sort of entered this routine that was accompanied by writer's block. So sitting at the piano, Tom York was not a piano player at this point. We had kind of talked about in OK Computer that we see Johnny manning the keys. So that really kind of just that detail alone sort of set some things straight. And his routine was to basically try and write, and he would scribble down little bits, and eventually, not to get too far ahead, but these little bits were kind of put in randomized order.
Yeah.
And the songs on this album they are really not thin in their depth, but like just thin lyrically. They're not long songs.
Austere.
Yes. And so he would sit down, try and play something on the piano to try and, get into new instrumentation. That's going to come up a lot. And eventually they did reconvene. So,
and I have a couple quotes from Tom here that are relevant to what you're talking about. First of all, if you're just joining because this is your favorite Radiohead album, I would say go back and listen to our part 2 of our OK Computer coverage, because we talk a lot about, I think, the conditions that led to this state of mind for Tom York are very extensively discussed in our coverage of Meeting People Is Easy. Just dealing with the commercial success of OK Computer took a real toll on the band, but on Tom in particular. But I think he's also suffering from major writer's block at the time that they begin rehearsals for what would become Kid A. But this quote is just kind of a chilling way to describe his relationship to being the front man of Radiohead at this point. Tom says, I always used, he's talking about music, and he says, I always used music as a way of moving on and dealing with things. And I sort of felt like the thing that helped me deal with things had been sold to the highest bidder, and I was simply doing its bidding. So he's got writer's block, and it doesn't sound like music is a organic and therapeutic process for him at this point. It's something that is his job and he has to do.
Because there's so much anticipation. Yeah, music can become like, there was these critical darlings. So I think there was a lot of what are they going to do next? How can they outdo it? And so I would imagine that music would become something that you could kind of feel not excited about.
Yes. So he starts composing songs on the piano, and he's not much of a piano player at this point. But he's just basically doing it to make something new happen. And whole band is pretty anxious about the musical direction he starts taking them in. Like you said, lyrically, it's much more austere. He's taking scraps of paper, reassembling them at random. And I guess this is really anxiety producing for Johnny, who kind of would shape what they were doing sonically around Tom's lyrics. So the fact that he has writer's block is kind of like really clogging up their process as a band. I also, so we kind of discovered last time that the handsome man is one of the only ones who it seems like regularly gives interviews. So it's kind of interesting because when I was reading about the initial beginnings of Kid A, it's all kind of through the eyes of Ed. But it's really funny because it's like this dude just seems so sweet and just kind of like he's like just kind of at the will of the way the tides flow for Tom. Because here I'd say guitarist Ed O'Brien had hoped. So right there, the word hoped just breaks your heart. He had hoped Radiohead's fourth album would comprise of short melodic guitar songs. But York stated there was no chance of the album sounding like that. I had completely had it with melody. I just wanted rhythm. All melodies to me were pure embarrassment. And then it says, O'Brien said, it's scary. Everyone feels insecure. I'm a guitarist, and suddenly it's like, well, there are no guitars on this track. So nobody is like super comfortable with what's happening.
No, Ed definitely wanted to go back to having a more active role in 4-chord songs.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think you said something super interesting, and not to jump the gun though, but how you said that Johnny would craft, the sonic atmosphere around Tom's melodies, and that since he didn't really have like a melody or some sort of skeletal thing to work around, that it was really anxiety producing. And I think maybe this might be a good lead in to start the album, but I think that really comes through because it's not that the melody of the vocals are at odds with what's happening instrumentation wise. They are in harmony with one another, but they are starting with the title track. There's an ambiguity to the melody. There's a ton of tension. And I think it's really interesting too that it was anxiety producing for Johnny Greenwood, because what I think this album led into is well, maybe not led into, but I know that this is Johnny Greenwood's favorite Radiohead album. He said that several times. And I think that that's super interesting, just knowing what conditions led into it.
Yeah, I think that we can discuss things in more detail. I know you have a lot of information at your fingertips, but maybe just to get us to the point of that an album obviously did eventually emerge from kind of this chaotic process. What ended up happening is, from Tom's writer's block and everything like that, no one knows what the fuck is going on. He doesn't want to make a guitar album, so they're messing around with all these electronic instruments and things like that. No one quite knows where they fit into this process. But what ends up happening is they go do some rehearsals in Copenhagen, which are really unproductive, kind of take the band to the verge of breaking up. They agree, hey, if we don't have something worth putting out, we're not going to do it just to do it. We'll break up. But then they go back home and they go back to England. And at that point, something kind of starts to congeal from this process. They end up with about 6 songs by early in 2000. And then they come up with a process for this new type of music they're making that is more inclusive of the rest of the band. With what they'll do is they'll split the band into 2 groups.
I think this is where Nigel really helped.
Yeah, you're right. So producer Nigel Godrich, who's worked with them since the Bends, is kind of helping organize the chaos here. And what they do is half the band will go generate sounds or musical sequences with acoustic instruments. And then the other half of the band will go manipulate those through the computer or synthesizers. And that's how they start to generate songs. So it sounds like a very like tedious process compared to getting in a room and making, and they described, I don't want to get ahead of it, but later when they go back to a more musically organic process, they described not wanting to sit around looking at computer screens together being how they made albums after.
Well, I mean, Phil, Colin, and Ed described that, and Tom as well. I don't think I've ever heard Johnny Greenwood explicitly say what he didn't like about the recording of this. That's probably just because he's a shy person and isn't super rich in details. But I think what comes through in that is, we talked about Johnny Greenwood being an old multi-instrumentalist, so he was really into his own marionette at this point. This is where he was getting into playing more, non-traditional instruments, right?
And just to let folks know, that's a very early electronic music instrument.
Yes,
he owns marionette. Or is it marionette or marionette?
It's marionette. So okay. I have the spelling for it right here. It's Martenot. Odes Martinet. Martineau. I don't know. Owns, but you do say it though with that affectation. So we'll cover spelling later.
It basically, if you were to put it into terms that are easily understood, it sounds a bit like a theremin,
very
but
much so.
It's a very large and complex instrument.
Yeah, so he was really into playing this, and that's cool, but I picture kind of like a dysfunctional family, like at a holiday or something like that, where it's like, well, what's Zach doing? Well, Zach's tuned out on his own marionette, I can't rely on him for shit. And, just like a dysfunctional family trying to find what works, and we'll
it's like a dad
them.
coming in and yelling at you for playing too many video games.
Right.
It's just like, pick up a guitar. Yeah. That's like the baseball glove.
It's really interesting to picture, because like some of my favorite albums were recorded in this way. Like the Strokes album, 2011 album Angles, was recorded in this way. I think yielded, maybe not my favorite, but like a very different sounding album that went in some new directions that was very, very clean sounding. I mean, Kid A isn't sterile, it's not without a soul, but it's very clean sounding. So I could see why that would be really hard to know, like, what are we creating? It's almost like making a movie, that feels really chaotic, and you only get to act in one part and you don't get to do the final edit. I feel like for Phil and Ed, and maybe Colin, I don't know. Maybe there was that ambiguity of like, what is this product even going to look like? I don't know. I don't know how much they were involved in the mixing and composition, but that would be my.
I think that's where it became really collaborative, because basically it sounds like no one knew what the hell they were doing until they started as a group kind of piecing together all these disparate arrangements that they had going on, and that's when the members of the band who were like, am I even going to be on this album, were able to take a really hands-on role. And I think that can kind of inform what you, the listener, can have in mind as we listen to this album is they did not make an electronic music album. They electronically reverse engineered a Radiohead album.
And Johnny Greenwood also, led a whole orchestra. So like you'll hear these things and you'll be like, oh, okay, well, how much is that really Radiohead? Well, Johnny Greenwood is acting as conductor on some of this. So, just keep that in mind as well, what Walker said. And then also that like a lot of what may sound like digital trickery and how much, musical effort went into that, it's a lot more manual than it may sound.
Yes, it's still a very analog process. And I think you hear that, like you said, there are rock songs on this album, and I think you hear something that sounds very The sound is much colder, I think, than they have been up to this point, but it's still very alive.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this album, in my opinion, holds up as well as it does 22 years later. Do you think that we're set up properly to get into some of the tracks here?
Absolutely, I'm ready. Because the album, it may seem like we're talking a good bit, but this is one of Radiohead's shorter albums, even though it's one of the meatier ones in terms of talk and discussion. It's not super long, so I think we should hit it.
Yes, but maybe this is also a relevant time to say they recorded 2 albums worth of material, and the next album in their discography, Amnesiac, is all from the same sessions. They did think about putting them out as one album, but they decided it was too dense. I think they made the absolutely right call there. Ultimately, each of those records does have a different feel, but you can tell that they came from the same process.
Yeah.
And so it's a shorter album, but it is maybe the most painstaking process the band, but certainly up to this point in their career, has gone through to make an album. Idiotalk is a Glenn Brothers production. Get in touch with us at idiotalk.podcast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at idiotalk.podcast. And thanks for listening to